When we think of the colonial era of North America and the empires that spanned this wide continent, we think of the French under the fleur-de-lis, the Spanish cross of Burgundy, and the Union Jack, flying over the 13 colonies. Though there were earlier empires beyond these great powers, the Dutch had famously colonized New York, but were conquered by the British. The Swedes had tried to colonize parts of Delaware, only to be conquered by the Dutch. Though there is one empire missing from this list, though unlike the Spanish, French, and British, their efforts failed. They were unable to cope with the price of empire. That is the Portuguese Empire. The earliest colonial powers were those of the Spanish and the Portuguese, who were so jealous of foreign competition and so full of self-assurance of success, they decided to carve the world in two, known as the Treaty of Tortasia. While today Portugal is a member of the EU and NATO and has lost almost all of its former empire, it was once a behemoth, spanning from across the known world, and capable of forging great wealth and spice markets abroad. The Kingdom of Portugal was founded through the fires of the Reconquista, with Christian kingdoms over centuries retaking the Iberian Peninsula from their Islamic rivals. Portugal more or less took on today's borders by the year 1273 under the King Alfonso III. The fledgling Portuguese kingdom found itself bound towards the Atlantic Ocean and contained by neighboring friend and foe kingdoms to the north, east, and south. Though it is due to its position along the Atlantic Ocean, their love for sail would soon begin. The Portuguese Empire was founded in 1415 by conquering Ceuta, a rich trading outpost along the Moroccan coastline. Later, the Azore Islands would be discovered in 1427, leading to one of Portugal's first colonization attempts. The adoption of several Islamic inventions would allow for the Portuguese to brave beyond the coastal waters of the Atlantic. Unlike the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean is enormous, not something to be trifled with. It's filled with storms, cyclones, long distances between land. It truly is a behemoth of an ocean to cross. Though the Portuguese, armed with the latest technology, the caravel, needle compasses, triangular sails, and improvements in map-making, allowed for their overseas expansion. Following these first decades of glory, technological advancements, and maritime prowess, the empire expanded, with Portugal creating trading outposts across West Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, Arabia, India, China, and across the entire world, bringing eye-watering amounts of wealth to the once humble kingdom, turning the medieval city of Lisbon into a city of the globe, with people and products from all over the world being traded in this great city. Believing the Portuguese Empire and the United Crowns of Castile and Aragon would clash, the papacy mediated an agreement between these two global powers, known as the Treaty of Tortasia in 1494. Though this treaty gave Portugal the realm of Asia and Africa to conquer, it gave the Americas to Spain. Though both of these empires were not entirely sure which lands were exactly east or west of their dividing line, due to much of the world still being unmapped at these times. One of these ambiguous areas between these two empires is the island of Newfoundland, a woody, rocky island jutting out off the coast of Canada. This land, unknown to Europeans of the time, had been discovered before. Written in the lore of the Vinland sagas, it was a land filled with great timber, hostile natives, and great pasture land. A land suitable for Norse colonizers. The first Norse visitors to this rocky island were blown-off sailors, who were later found by Leif Erikson on his first visit to the Isle of Newfoundland and the Canadian shores. Unknown to these Norsemen of the time, they were the first Europeans to visit the Americas, nearly 500 years before Columbus. Below is a segment of the Vinland Saga.
One day the king, Olaf Tryggvason, spoke to Leif, saying, "Do you mean to go out to Greenland this summer?" "That I do," said Leif, "if it be your will." The king answers, "I believe it will be well, and you shall go thither on my errand and announce the Christian faith there." Leif said it should be as he would, but this seemed to him a hard errand to carry out in Greenland. The king said that he saw no man better suited to the task than he, and luck will go with you. "Only if I have yours," says Leif. Leif puts out to sea and is long voyaging, and he made landfall where he had never before expected to find land. There was self-sown wheat there, and vines. There were trees of the kind called maple, and all of these they brought some tokens, some timbers so large that they were used for house building. Leif found men on a wreck and brought them home with him. In this he showed the greatest nobility and manliness, as in much else, when he brought the Christian faith to the land, and was ever since called Leif the Lucky.
These Norse visitors built a way station, a winter camp, and a repair facility at Leon al Meadows for their boats, occupying the site off and on for 20 years, with some scholars arguing for 100 years. Though these Norse visitors were not the first men to inhabit this rocky island, with the ancestors of the tribe of the Beothuk calling this island their home. The Norse called these people
Skraelings,
though what their original name has been lost to time, buried under the conquest of European Empire. Unfortunately, more is known about the Norse than the Beothuk, with the native nation having been completely or near completely exterminated. Some trace genetics remain in local populations, although the tribe as a whole has perished due to European slave raids, colonization, and disease, though the Norse would not last. Unable to continue living in Greenland following colder temperatures, they moved back to the European homelands. Some of these settlers moved back to the remaining Norse colonies of Iceland, or they perished. Later, these voyages and the partial settlement of Vinland would be recalled as a fable of Norse prowess from the olden days. Though the Treaty of Tortasia forbade exploration and colonization of Portugal in Spanish lands, it was unclear where that line actually began and ended. Though an Italian man named Giovanni Cabot, who would later adopt an English name of John Cabot, explored the Canadian coastline on behalf of the English crown, searching for the fabled Northwest Passage and riches to exploit. He would be the first European to see the Canadian shores in well over 500 years. When these maps of Newfoundland were first created by John Cabot and his crew, and later published by the English government, the island of Newfoundland appeared to be east of the Tortasia dividing line, with the Portuguese crown arguing these lands were in Portuguese territory. They soon battered the English, claiming they had no right to colonize or exploit these lands. In other words, the Portuguese argued that this was their monopoly, and there would be no room or mercy for competitors. During this time, the Portuguese could enforce their monopoly, being substantially richer and more powerful than their French and English rivals, all from their global empire and their vast riches. Though this is getting into the realm of controversial archaeology and historical debate, but these are important events which may have actually happened. While the Norse may have been the first Europeans to visit the Americas, Columbus may not have been the second. There are varying sources and testimonies, written in the 15th and 16th centuries, attesting to this, though as of now these are all theories, with no real way of proving these voyages ever happened. I will give a brief summary of these voyages, because I might possibly do a fuller length video on this subject later. In 1325, according to two Venetian sailors, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, met a man who had been blown off course and landed in Nova Scotia. And this man had claimed to find a lost colony of Norsemen. In 1454, Breton fishermen supposedly fished off the island in Newfoundland, according to a charter by the Abbey of Beauport and Paimpol. In 1472, the Portuguese king Alfonso V of Portugal and the Danish king Christian I of Denmark jointly organized an expedition to reroute the old Viking routes of the Vinland sagas. And according to linguistic analysis and the commercial records of the whaling industry by Basque sailors, there are certain documents which predate Columbus by over a decade. All this information is speculative, and there's no real way of proving these voyages or documents are legitimate, though it is possible. Many believed the Norse visiting North America was only a myth, though that turned out to be wrong. There are two main theories behind the Portuguese colonization of Newfoundland and Canada, each with a surprising amount of legitimacy. The first theory is that Portuguese sailors, merchants, and explorers would follow in the wake of John Cabot's exploration in Newfoundland, using his recently published maps. The next theory goes against this idea, arguing that the Portuguese didn't follow John Cabot, but had traveled to these lands before the English. This theory is gaining wider traction within the historical and scholarly world, but is insanely difficult to prove. This theory asserts that the first non-Norse Europeans to visit the Americas were actually the fishermen of Western Europe, either the Basque, Breton, or Portuguese peoples, and that later explorers would follow these fishermen to unknown waters. Though there isn't much evidence for this. Though early Briton, Basque, and Portuguese fishermen and sailors did fish and explore the shores of Labrador and the glacier-filled seas surrounding Newfoundland, there has been no archaeological, ethnographic, or detailed documentation to assert these people of the sea came before John Cabot. But remembering the earlier possible voyages of explorers and fishermen prior to Columbus, it's possible these rumors, stories, and myths spread to the Portuguese sailors of their day, hearing of the legendary area, brimming with wealth and resources. Similar to the myth of El Dorado, maybe these people follow these whispers of a land far to the west, covered in forest, with glaciers bobbing in the water, and with fish so plentiful you could pluck them out of the water with your hands. The first Portuguese expedition set out to explore these wild lands. While the shorelines of Newfoundland had been explored, much of the sea further west of the island remained shrouded in mystery. A story begins with a young man named Zhao Fernandez, a small landowner from the island of Tortasia in the Azores. The exact life of this man is mostly unknown. He appears to be one of those colorful characters of history that will often pop up and then disappear. His first mention in historical records was in 1486, being accounted for in a customs report in the city of Bristol, listed as
Fernandez et Gonzalez.
In his trading adventures around Bristol, it's likely he heard rumors from fellow sailors and merchants about the English king, Henry VIII, funding an expedition to explore lands for England. Apparently, Xiao joined John Cabot on his famous expedition to the eastern shores of North America, likely spending his voyage learning under John Cabot, mastering the skills of survey, documentation, and navigation in unknown waters. He would later become a valuable asset due to his experience in navigating and exploring the unknown lands of North America. During his survey work for the English crown, he would later name the lands of Canada, Labrador, after himself being a small landowner, which is called Lavrador in Portuguese, possibly because the long stretching shoreline, filled with timber, prairies, and cliffs, surrounded by the endless waving sea, reminded him of home and his humble beginnings. The map of Weimar from 1530 has a caption near Greenland.
This land was discovered by the English from the city of Bristol, but in it there is nothing of value. And as the one who first notified it was a Labrador from the Azores, they named it.
Santa Cruz, in his manuscript of 1541, described the land of Labrador as follows.
Two Portuguese brothers, called the Royal Court, are said to have asserted that the great mainland of the West Indies, North America, of which they occupied the end of it, was separated from that island of Labrador, Greenland, by a sea channel, very wide and wide, which the pilot AntonioGaboto also had information about. It was called the Land of the Labrador, because a Labrador from the islands of the Azores gave notice and information about it to the King of England. When sick, he had sent in search of him AntonioGaboto, the English pilot and father of Sebastiano Gaboto, who is now Her Majesty's pilot major. Adjacent to the coast of Bacalhaus, Terra Nova, where the Corte Reis, the two Portuguese brothers, went to colonize, and which was discovered by the pilot AntonioGaboto, the English. There are many islands.
In 1499, he returned to Portugal to tell the Portuguese king, Manuel I, of his explorations and adventures in these unknown waters, providing maps to the royal court and the king to view. The king likely looked intensively at these maps, retracing the layout of all the islands, place names, and resources with great attention. Eyeing and thinking of all the possible treasures and riches to be gained from these new lands, he granted Zhao a charter to rediscover these lands and claim them from Portugal, especially too that he might discover and find again, as quoted in his charter. Xiao would go on to help the Corte Reis brothers, a pair of famous 15th century Portuguese explorers, and later he would help a joint English and Portuguese venture to discover more lands in North America. Though details uncertain, Xiao ran afoul of the English monarch Henry VIII, likely due to his discreet publishing of English discoveries to the Portuguese crown, or in assisting the Corte Reis brothers in examining the Canadian coast, a land that had been claimed by the English crown. Regardless of the reason, he was never included in another English expedition, and he would soon disappear back into the mist of history. It's unlikely he ever returned home. He's mentioned to have disappeared in 1505 or 1506, likely dying in one of the fierce storms of the Atlantic. The last recorded mention of this intriguing explorer was in a petition to King Manuel I by a former colleague of his.
I have received an order from the king, our master, to undertake a voyage of discovery, myself and Zhao Fernandez, landowner, in which we discovered that we had been absent from Terceira for 3 good years, and when I returned to the said island, I found my people expelled from the said lands.
What happened to these lands is unknown, but it's likely, in all his years of exploring and sailing on the open ocean, his neighbors stole his land, believing he'd never return home. Though it's also just as likely that the lands he had previously owned were given away to either another official or another explorer who had not gained the disdain of the king. At the same time as Xiao explored the vast wilderness of Canada, an explorer and a friend of Xiao named Gaspar Corte Reis set sail for the Portuguese crown to claim even more land for their global empire. Like Xiao, Gaspar was a man of the sea, coming from the same island in the Azores as Xiao, likely learning how to sail, navigate, and master the waves from a very young age. Gaspar was one of the men who sailed with Xiao in his 1499 charter to visit and claim the lands of Tierra Verde and Labrador for Portugal. He would have seen creatures unknown to many Portuguese at this time, such as seals, killer whales, and mysterious sharks, swimming in these blue waters. He would sail again in 1501, armed with 3 caravels. Where he traveled to is unknown, though he likely sailed to Greenland or the shores of Baffin Island, being forced to go further south due to the sea ice blocking his route. It's on his journey south he would find a more temperate climate, possibly landing in eastern Newfoundland. It's here one of the tragic patterns of European exploration and discovery would start all over again. Much like Columbus, Gaspar believed the natives of Newfoundland, the Beothuk, would make good slaves and good converts to Christianity. Gaspar and his men captured 60 Beothuk natives, bound them in chains, and forced them into the dark hold of one of their ships. He described them as following:
resemble gypsies in color, features, stature, and aspect, are clothed in the skins of various animals. They are very shy and gentle, but well formed in arms and legs and shoulders beyond description.
In a certain twist of fate, only the captive Beothuk reached Portugal, with Gaspar and his ship having sunk in one of the Atlantic's many storms. It's likely as his ship was plunged into the dark abyss of the endless ocean, he felt the same way those captured Beothuk felt, doomed, unable to escape their gruesome fate, as he slowly plunged into the cold ocean waters. In 1502, Gaspar's brother, Miguel Corte Real, went in search for him, but he too met the same fate as his brother, sinking in a violent Atlantic storm, never to be seen again. To the Portuguese crown, these sunken ships, the enslaved Beothuk, would represent an opportunity for growth, viewing the lands that had ended so many lives as filled with fish, timber, and slaves.